According to former girlfriend Linda Thompson, the bedroom is decorated extravagantly in black.
The heavy drill finally pierced the thick steel plate inside the private office, and the lock broke after 45 years of absolute silence. The Graceland basement was filled with the sharp smell of old oil as the massive iron door slowly swung open. Inside lay the one secret Elvis Presley never shared with the Memphis Mafia or his closest family. The relatives gathered in the dim light, took one look at the center shelf, and completely froze. What they found inside that dark vault has just stunned his entire family. The heavy iron in the Graceland basement.
It's hard to be a gambler betting on the number that changes every time. When you think you're gonna win.
A single spark flew from the edge of the safe dial as the technician applied the pressure override tool. Nobody in the room breathed. The basement floor of Graceland always felt cold, but on this particular morning, the air was completely stagnant. For 45 years, the square iron box remained embedded in the concrete wall behind a false wood panel. The public tours passed just 30 feet away on the upper levels. Millions of fans walked through the mansion without ever knowing what sat directly beneath their feet. The current executors of the Presley estate stood in a tight semicircle, their eyes fixed on the rusted dial. The metal gave a sharp, metallic pop. The family had avoided this room for decades because the legal battles kept the house frozen in time. Then, the recent ownership transitions changed everything. A quiet filing in the probate court required a complete inventory of every unlisted asset on the property. That meant the sealed safe could no longer be ignored. The workmen spent 3 hours setting up the diamond-tipped core drill. They had to cut through 4 inches of reinforced mid-century steel. The high-pitched whine of the motor finally stopped, replaced by the heavy thud of a releasing bolt. A major question immediately gripped everyone watching the door handle turn. Why did Elvis keep this specific vault entirely out of his official will? He had lawyers for his contracts. He had accountants for his nightly box office takes. Yet this box carried no serial numbers on the company ledgers. The family knew that whatever sat inside was never meant for the public archive. A junior attorney stepped forward with a pair of white cotton gloves and a digital camera. He reached for the brass handle, his fingers trembling against the cold metal. The heavy door did not slide easily. The rubber seals had melted into a black, sticky tar over the decades. The technician used a small crowbar to pry the edge open by 3 inches. A rush of trapped air escaped from the dark interior, carrying the distinct scent of ozone and decaying paper. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating 3 separate shelves. The top shelf held a stack of leather-bound logs. The bottom shelf held a heavy canvas bank bag with a brass padlock. But it was the middle shelf that drew every eye in the room. A single velvet jewelry pouch sat directly in the center of that middle shelf. It was stained with dark spots, possibly water damage from a basement pipe leak 30 years ago. The attorney carefully lifted the pouch, noting its unusual weight. Something solid and rectangular shifted inside the cloth. He pulled the drawstring wide, tipping the contents onto a white folding table. A heavy gold ring tumbled out, followed by a folded piece of thick stationery. The ring was not one of the famous stage pieces. It was a simple, unpolished band with a single initials engraving on the inside. What name was carved into that hidden gold? The family members leaned closer, their faces illuminated by the harsh overhead work lamps. The attorney used a magnifying glass to read the tiny cursive script. He cleared his throat, but no words came out for a few seconds. He had to look at the folded paper before he could even process the inscription. The initials did not belong to any known member of the Memphis Mafia. They did not belong to any of the famous co-stars or public girlfriends from the Hollywood era. The letters were crude, sharp, and deeply personal. The folded stationery beside the ring held the real answers. The paper was from a hotel in Las Vegas, dated August 9th, 1977. That was exactly 1 week before the world changed forever. Elvis had written the lines using a blue ballpoint pen. The ink had faded to a dull gray, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It possessed that familiar, erratic slant that characterized his final months. The first sentence did not contain a greeting. It went straight into a direct instruction regarding a private financial transfer that never made it into the bank records. The estate had spent 45 years tracking every single dollar from the touring years. They thought the ledger books were complete. This single piece of paper proved that a secret account existed outside the United States. The note listed a routing number for a private bank in Zurich, Switzerland. The total amount listed on the line made the lead executor completely sit down in his chair. It was a sum that could have altered the entire financial trajectory of the family during the dark days of the early 1980s. Why did Elvis hide millions of dollars from his own father, who was running the estate finances at the time? The note explained the reason in brutal detail. Elvis knew the inner circle was collapsing around him. He could see the bills stacking up from the medical suppliers and the private jet maintenance. He knew the touring schedule was the only thing keeping the mansion open. The hidden funds were designed as an emergency parachute, but not for himself. The document explicitly stated who was supposed to receive the key to the Zurich account. The family members looked at each other in total disbelief as the attorney read the final paragraph aloud. The beneficiary was someone the family had completely cut off after the funeral. The name on the paper threatened to reopen every old wound from the 1970s. Before anyone could speak, the technician pointed a flashlight back into the depths of the safe. He had noticed something else. The back wall of the iron box was not solid. A small seam ran down the center of the steel plating, suggesting a second hidden compartment lay even deeper inside the stone. The unseen combination locked in August 1977. The technician tapped the back wall of the safe with a small steel hammer. A dull, hollow thud echoed through the concrete basement. That sound confirmed the existence of a second compartment. The attorney carefully placed the Las Vegas note into a plastic evidence bag. Everyone in the room wanted to know how this hidden space remained a secret during the initial estate audits. In the chaotic weeks following August 19, 1977, bank examiners combed through every inch of Graceland. They found the main safe, but they never realized the back wall moved. To understand why this second box existed, you have to go back to the final midnight hours of Elvis's life. The mansion was buzzing with energy because the Portland tour was supposed to start the next day. Members of the Memphis Mafia were packing heavy trunks in the driveway. Footsteps clattered up and down the main stairs. Yet, Elvis remained locked inside his private office on the first floor. He did not want his bodyguards in the room. He did not want his father checking the receipts. He was alone with a small screwdriver and a fresh can of mechanical grease. A specific mystery had puzzled estate researchers for 45 years. Investigators originally found a torn slip from a Dr. Nichopoulos prescription pad on Elvis's desk. It contained 3 handwritten numbers. The early executors assumed these numbers formed the combination to the main safe wall. They turned the dial repeatedly, but the lock refused to budge. They eventually hired a locksmith to bypass the outer mechanism. It turns out, those 3 scribbled numbers were never meant for the main lock. They belonged to the internal mechanism hidden behind the false back plate. Elvis had personally altered the inner combination just days before his death. He did not write the new sequence down in any ledger. He trusted his memory alone. On that final night, he made 3 separate trips down the back staircase. He carried a heavy leather pouch tucked under his arm. A maid working in the kitchen saw him cross the hallway at 2 in the morning. She later told investigators that he looked completely exhausted, but his movements were deliberate. He was hiding his most personal history from the very people paid to protect him. The rising pressure inside the mansion had become completely unbearable during that final summer. The tabloids were preparing to publish a tell-all book written by former security staff. Elvis knew his private life was about to become public property. The stage persona was a trap, and the finances were a disaster. He needed a place where the managers and the lawyers could not reach. The hidden compartment inside the basement wall was his ultimate sanctuary. It was the only space in the world where he truly controlled his own narrative. The technician slipped a thin wire camera through the drill hole in the back plate. The digital screen on his device flickered to life, casting a pale blue glow on the basement walls. The lens revealed a tiny velvet-lined shelf measuring just 6 inches wide. A thick bundle of documents sat inside, tied together with a piece of coarse white butcher's twine. On top of the papers lay a small, tarnished silver key. The key did not match any lock in the mansion, the airplanes, or the custom cars. A sudden realization hit the lead executor as he stared at the camera monitor. The twine used to bind the papers was identical to the string found in the Graceland kitchen drawers in the late 1970s. This was not an old asset from the 1960s movie years. Elvis had placed these items into the wall during his very last days on Earth. The family stood completely silent as the technician prepared to use a hydraulic spreader to pop the inner plate. The metal groaned under the immense pressure. Why was Elvis so determined to keep these specific papers away from his inner circle? The answers were about to surface. The heavy iron plate gave way with a sharp snap, dropping forward onto the work table. A small cloud of gray dust billowed out into the room. The attorney reached inside the dark cavity and lifted the twine-tied bundle. The top document was a legal agreement that completely contradicted the public narrative of the Presley estate. The first line contained a name that made the family completely lose their breath: the true heirs and the silent basement standoff. The attorney laid the twine-tied bundle on the center of the folding table. Nobody moved. The legal executors and the Presley family members formed a tight ring around the paper stack. The room had grown completely quiet, save for the low hum of the basement ventilation system. A legal representative for the estate stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. He knew the financial future of the entire property could rest on the next few seconds. The name written on the top page belonged to a person who was never supposed to have a claim to the king's assets. To understand the tension in that basement, you have to look at the financial reality of the estate over the last 45 years. The public believes the Presley family was always wealthy. The truth is much more complicated. In 1977, the cash reserves were dangerously low. The high cost of maintaining the mansion, the jets, and the massive entourage had drained the bank accounts. The touring schedule was the only thing keeping the operation afloat. When the music stopped that August, the executors faced an immediate mountain of debt and tax audits. A major question had always lingered over the final distribution of the estate. Did Elvis actually attempt to alter his primary line of succession during his final days? His official will left everything to his daughter, Lisa Marie, with his father, Vernon Presley, acting as the executor. That document was signed in January of 1977, but the papers extracted from the hidden wall compartment carried a much later date. They were finalized on August 12th, just 4 days before his death. This was a completely new legal framework. The attorney carefully snipped the butcher's twine with a pair of metal scissors. The string fell away, allowing the thick parchment pages to uncurl. The document was titled as a private living trust, drawn up by a small-town lawyer outside of Memphis. Elvis had bypassed his main corporate legal team in Los Angeles to create it. He did not want his managers to see the text. He did not want his accountants to track the filings. The first paragraph explicitly stated that this trust superseded all previous wills regarding his personal, unreleased archival materials. The financial stakes in the room instantly skyrocketed. The main estate depended entirely on the royalties from the classic songs and the image rights. But this secret trust covered something completely different. It governed hundreds of hours of unreleased home recordings, private journals, and personal home movies. These were assets that the family had been searching for since the late 1970s. They were worth millions to modern streaming platforms and documentary producers. The document stated these items were to be held in a separate entity, entirely detached from the main corporate structure. The family members stared at the signature line at the bottom of the page. The cursive writing was large and shaky, clearly written with a heavy hand. Next to Elvis's signature was the witness line. The person who signed as the witness was a private nurse who worked the night shift at the mansion during that final summer. She was someone who saw Elvis when the stage lights were off. She knew the extent of his physical decline. She was also someone the family had asked to leave the property immediately after the funeral service. Why did Elvis trust a night shift nurse over his own lifelong friends and family? The second page of the document provided the answer in clear, unvarnished language. Elvis wrote that he felt completely surrounded by people who viewed him as a financial machine. He knew his health was failing, and he knew the people around him were already making plans for a world without him. The nurse was the only person who did not ask him for a cut of the upcoming tour earnings. He gave her the authority to execute this private trust, to ensure his final personal messages reached their intended targets. The lead executor picked up a secondary folder from the bundle. Inside lay a set of physical keys and a series of deposit receipts. The receipts showed that the physical journals and tape reels were not even inside Graceland. They were stored in a secure commercial vault in downtown Memphis under a corporate pseudonym. The family had spent decades believing these items were lost or stolen by former employees. In reality, Elvis had personally orchestrated their removal from the house to keep them safe from the inevitable legal scramble following his passing. The silence in the basement was broken by the sharp ring of a cellular phone. An attorney for the estate answered it, his voice dropping to a whisper as he spoke to the senior partners upstairs. The legal implications were a complete nightmare. If this trust was validated by a probate judge, it would mean a significant portion of the historical archive belonged to a completely separate legal entity. It could freeze current museum exhibitions. It could halt upcoming biographical projects. The family stood in a silent standoff, realizing the history they took for granted was completely fractured. The personal revelation behind the Memphis Steel. The lead attorney lifted the second velvet tray from the safe and placed it beside the legal trust documents. A collective intake of breath echoed through the concrete room. Inside the tray sat a black, unlabeled tape cassette. It looked exactly like the standard audio tapes sold in drugstores during the mid-1970s. The plastic casing was slightly scuffed on the edges, indicating it had been handled frequently before being locked away. Resting directly beneath the cassette was a stack of small, square notebooks with black composition covers. The family members pressed closer to the folding table, their eyes fixed on the small tape. Everyone knew Elvis constantly recorded himself. He kept portable tape machines in his bedroom, his hotel suites, and his limousines. He used them to capture song ideas, late-night conversations, and private thoughts. Most of those recordings were confiscated by his management or lost in the chaos of 1977. This particular tape had survived in total darkness for 45 years. The attorney picked it up by the edges, checking for any signs of brittle tape degradation. A small cassette player sat on the workbench, brought down by the technician for this exact purpose. The attorney hesitated for a moment, looking at the estate executors. A senior family member nodded slowly, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. The attorney slipped the tape into the deck and pressed the heavy mechanical play button. The machine gave a low, rhythmic hiss as the plastic wheel began to spin. For 5 long seconds, the room was filled with nothing but the static sound of an empty room. Then, a throat cleared. The voice was unmistakable. It was lower than the tone he used on stage, carrying the heavy, exhausted drawl of his final months. He was speaking directly into the microphone, his breathing heavy between sentences. He did not introduce himself. He did not state the date. He simply began to talk about a dream he had the previous night involving his mother, Gladys. He spoke about the old house in Tupelo, describing the smell of the grass after a summer rain. The sheer intimacy of the sound made a relative cover her mouth to suppress a sob. What did Elvis say on that tape that completely transformed the family's understanding of his final days? He stopped talking about the past and began addressing his daughter, Lisa Marie. He spoke to her as if she were standing right in front of him. He told her that he knew the world outside the gates was becoming too loud. He apologized for the constant presence of the bodyguards, the flashing cameras, and the strangers walking through their home. He said he wanted to build a place where she could just be a regular child, away from the shadow of his name. The tape ran for approximately 3 minutes before a loud click signaled the end of the recording. The room went completely quiet again. The attorney pushed the eject button, the plastic door opening with a sharp snap. He carefully returned the cassette to its velvet tray and turned his attention to the black composition notebooks. He opened the first cover, revealing pages filled with dense cursive writing. The blue ink was smudged in several places, as if his hand had brushed against the wet paper while writing in a hurry. These notebooks were not song lyrics. They were daily journals kept during the final 2 years of his life. The entries were short, often consisting of just 3 or 4 lines per day. He recorded his physical pain, his sleepless nights, and his growing frustration with the touring schedule. On one page, dated June 14, 1976, he wrote about a performance in Rhode Island. He stated that his legs felt like lead during the second set, and he wondered how much longer his body could sustain the demands of the audience. The emotional fracture in the room was palpable as the attorney turned the pages. The family was reading the unvarnished thoughts of a man who was completely trapped by his own success. He wrote extensively about his isolation, noting that the people paid to keep him safe were the same people leaking his secrets to the local newspapers. He felt like a prisoner inside his own bedroom, watching the security guards patrol the grounds through his closed curtains. The wealth and fame had become a physical cage, and the notebooks were his only escape. The attorney stopped at a page near the back of the second notebook. This entry was written in a different pen, using black ink that had dried to a dark charcoal color. It was dated August 15th, 1977. That was the night before his scheduled departure for the New York tour. The writing was much larger than the previous entries, the letters jagged and uneven. He wrote about a long conversation he had just finished with Priscilla. He stated that despite everything that happened in the courts, she was the only one who truly understood the weight he carried. The lead executor reached out, her gloved fingers gently touching the edge of the paper. She realized that these notebooks completely destroyed the official narrative created by the early biographers. Elvis was not oblivious to his situation. He was fully aware of his physical decline and the financial mismanagement happening downstairs. He was actively documenting his reality, ensuring that if anything happened to him, his daughter would eventually know the truth about his struggles. He was leaving a breadcrumb trail through the concrete wall. The technician pointed his flashlight back inside the dark safe cavity, breaking the emotional spell in the room. He had noticed a small metal lever hidden behind the tracks, where the inner steel plate had rested. The lever was covered in a thick layer of black grease, completely invisible until the plate was entirely removed. The attorney stepped back from the table, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the technician, then at the family members. The discovery was not finished. The safe held one final secret, the untold rewrite of the Presley legacy. The technician reached his gloved hand deep into the dark cavity and pulled the hidden grease-covered lever. A heavy metallic click echoed from the very back of the concrete wall. The family members stepped closer to the workbench, their eyes fixed on the small flashlight beam. Slowly, a false back panel slid downward into a recessed slot in the floor. That movement revealed a final, velvet-lined compartment measuring no more than 4 inches deep. Inside sat a single, heavily tarnished silver box with a cracked red wax seal on the lid. The room remained completely silent as the attorney carefully lifted the silver box out of the wall. The wax seal carried the imprint of a private signet ring Elvis wore during his early years in the Army. The attorney used a small scalpel to split the red wax, allowing the metal latch to pop open. He lifted the lid, exposing the single item Elvis died trying to protect from the outside world. Resting on a bed of yellowed cotton was a thick leather-bound diary and a heavy gold medal. The gold medal was the official commendation Elvis received from his service in Germany, an honor he kept entirely private. But it was the leather diary beneath it that caught everyone's attention. The cover was worn smooth on the edges, indicating years of the constant handling. The attorney opened the first page, revealing a date from 1968. This was the exact year of the famous comeback special, the moment that revived his entire musical career. The family realized this book spanned nearly a decade of unrecorded history. The stunning discovery of this missing personal diary completely changes our understanding of his final days. For 45 years, biographers claimed that Elvis had lost control of his career choices after his divorce. This book proved the exact opposite. The entries showed that he was quietly planning a massive restructuring of his entire business model. He had written detailed plans to dissolve his relationship with his management team immediately following the conclusion of the 1977 winter tour. He was going to take total control of his publishing rights. The lead executor stared at a page dated July 24th, 1977. Elvis had written out a complete set list for a self-produced album he wanted to record in his private studio, without any studio executives present. He wanted to return to his gospel and blues roots, away from the commercial pop songs forced upon him by the record labels. He even listed the names of independent musicians he wanted to hire for the session. He was preparing to completely break away from the corporate machine that had dictated his life. The immediate reaction of the family members was a mix of profound grief and total disbelief. They were looking at a version of Elvis that the world had never seen, an artist who was still deeply passionate about his music, despite his failing physical health. He was not a passive participant in his own decline. He was a man fighting to reclaim his artistic freedom behind closed doors. This discovery meant the public narrative surrounding his final year was completely wrong. He was not giving up. He was fighting to start over. The attorney turned to the final written entry in the book, dated August 16th, 3 in the morning. That was just 12 hours before he was found on his bathroom floor. The handwriting was remarkably steady compared to the other notebooks. He wrote a short final sentence regarding his daughter's future. He stated that the money did not matter as long as she retained ownership of the songs he sang for her. He knew the corporate predators were waiting, and this diary was his final shield for his child. The technician shone his flashlight back into the empty safe compartment to ensure nothing else remained. The iron walls were completely bare. The family stood around the white folding table, looking at the piles of journals, the Zurich banknotes, and the silver box. They knew this find could not be kept hidden from the global public for long. The historical importance of these documents would eventually require them to be placed in the National Archives. The history of rock and roll was about to be completely rewritten. The shattered certainty of the king's estate. The lead attorney slowly closed the worn leather cover of the final diary. The snap of the metal clasp sounded like a gunshot in the small basement room. The technician began packing his drilling rigs into their heavy canvas bags, his work completely finished. The executors did not speak. They stood looking at the stacks of documents, the black cassette tape, and the Zurich bank receipts resting on the white folding table. The air inside the Graceland basement remained cold, but the atmosphere had completely transformed. The absolute certainty that had governed the preservation of this estate for 45 years was completely gone. A major legal question now hung over every single person standing in that room. Who actually owned these physical items under the current framework of the Presley estate? The official will from January of 1977 had been processed through the courts decades ago. It was a matter of public record, but these hidden documents discovered behind a false iron plate created an entirely separate legal reality. If the private living trust from August 12th was validated by a judge, the entire corporate structure of the museum would have to be altered. The family was looking at months, if not years, of intense litigation behind closed doors. The immediate priority for the executors was security. They knew that if a single photograph of these journals leaked to the Memphis press, it would trigger a global media storm. Collectors would offer millions for a single page of the final diary. The lead attorney called for a set of heavy, fireproof transport cases to be brought down from the main office. He carefully lifted the black composition notebooks, placing them between layers of protective foam. He handled the items with a level of reverence usually reserved for ancient religious artifacts. These were the final, unvarnished thoughts of the most famous man on Earth. To understand the long-term impact of this discovery, you have to look at how history is constructed. For over 40 years, the narrative of Elvis Presley's final months was written by people who looked at him from the outside. Biographers analyzed his stage costumes, his weight fluctuations, and his medical prescriptions. They painted a picture of a man who had completely checked out of his own life. The leather diary extracted from the secret compartment shattered that entire perspective. It proved that while his body was failing, his mind was actively plotting a massive professional escape. He was calculating his exit strategy until his very last night. The family members slowly walked up the narrow basement stairs, leaving the empty iron safe behind. The technician turned off the work lamps, throwing the concrete corner back into deep shadow. The false wood paneling was left open, exposing the drilled metal and the broken lever mechanism. For 45 years, that small space had held the true emotional baseline of the mansion. Now, that energy was moving upstairs into the administrative offices. The relatives sat around a large mahogany conference table on the second floor, their faces illuminated by the bright afternoon sun coming through the windows. The legal teams spent the next 3 hours reviewing the specific terms of the Zurich banknote. They discovered that the account had remained completely untouched since 1977. Because it was established under a private corporate pseudonym, the Swiss bank had simply accumulated interest over the decades without ever reporting the balance to the standard probate courts. The total sum was large enough to completely alter the financial baseline of the surviving bloodline. More importantly, the explicit instructions left by Elvis ensured that the funds could only be accessed for the specific care and protection of his descendants. The black cassette tape presented a completely different kind of challenge for the family. It was not a financial asset, it was a deeply personal message from a father to his child. The executors had to decide whether that audio would ever be heard by the public. On one hand, releasing the tape would humanize Elvis in a way that no movie or biography ever could. It would show the world the gentle, protective man who existed behind the flashing stage lights. On the other hand, it was an incredibly private moment that Elvis had locked behind 4 inches of reinforced mid-century steel. He had hidden it for a reason. As dusk began to fall over the Memphis estate, the transport cases were locked and loaded into an armored sedan, waiting in the back courtyard. The car drove slowly down the long driveway, passing through the famous musical gates. Outside, a small crowd of fans stood in the evening light, lighting candles and playing old records from the 1950s. They had no idea that just 50 yards away, the entire history of their idol had just been completely rewritten. They were celebrating the myth, while the family in the office was dealing with the raw, complicated reality of the man. The discovery inside the private safe did not just stun the Presley family, it completely reoriented their relationship with the past. They realized that the mansion was not just a museum or a tourist attraction. It was a house that still held secrets, designed by a man who knew exactly how to hide his truth from the world. The empty iron box in the basement wall would remain there, a silent monument to the final weeks of August 1977. The secrets were out in the open, the vault was bare, and the family was left to face a completely transformed legacy. The opening of Elvis Presley's private safe has completely shattered 45 years of rock and roll history. It proved that the king was actively fighting to reclaim his life and his music until his very last hours on Earth. What do you think is the most shocking part of this incredible basement discovery? Should the family release the private audio tape to the public, or should those final words stay secret forever? Tell us your thoughts in the comment section below. If you want to explore more hidden chapters of music history, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications. Thank you for watching.